Welcome to Coffee and Regs.
Hi, I'm EJ Yerzak, Director of Cyber IT Services with Compliance Solution Strategies. Here to talk today about recapping 2021 and looking into our crystal ball at what 2022 portends in the realm of cybersecurity. No surprise, 2021 was not a slow year when it comes to cybersecurity. A lot of cyber attacks making headline news. Ransomware presented perhaps the biggest challenge to many firms in 2021. In fact, ransomware attacks skyrocketed in 2021. We saw an increase in the exfiltrate and extort variety of ransomware. Ransomware variants continue to emerge. It seems as if the more we were able to detect and stop certain variants of ransomware, new variants were being created, were emerging in the wild. And the exfiltrate and extort variety is particularly concerning because going back a few years ago, the ransomware variants that we tended to see were the types that just locked up your files. And a good rule of thumb was if you had reasonable, adequate backups, if you were backing up your data with a reasonable frequency, and you had reasonable assurances that you had access to offline, non-connected copies of your data that were reasonably safe from that ransomware and other malware, you'd be fine. You can recover from the backups, not pay the ransom, and you'd be fine. The problem with the exfiltrate and extort variety is the hackers have grown wise to the fact that we're backing up our data and we didn't have to pay the ransom. And so they've developed a strategy where they're not just encrypting your data and rendering that data unusable to you as the end user, but they're actually stealing that data. They're exfiltrating that data to another location and they're saying, hey, pay the ransom or we're going to leak this data to the public. We're going to release this data unless you pay this ransom. So that makes it a particularly more concerning type of malware to deal with because firms can't simply sit back and recover from their backups and not pay the ransom. Now, FinCEN has released guidance saying that simply paying the ransom, if that ransom is paid to an actor that is on a foreign sanctions list, could result in a money laundering violation by the party that's paying that ransom. So again, it's not simply as easy as pay the ransom if you have to as a matter of last resort, because that ransomware payment itself is a money laundering violation, again, if that threat actor is on a particular sanctions list. Now, there is a safe harbor, provided that the firm that's paying the ransom notifies law enforcement promptly and cooperates with law enforcement, is involved with law enforcement. But again, it adds a certain complexity to the equation when we're dealing with ransomware. Now, my advice remains the same. Continue to back up your data, maintain non-connected backups so that if ransomware does percolate throughout your cloud environment and to any connected backups and any real-time backups, you have another set of backups relatively immune from that ransomware that you could recover from. But again, be mindful that if you do have to pay the ransom, cooperate with law enforcement, notify law enforcement, get them involved early on in the process, because that's going to be necessary to take advantage of that safe harbor. Ransomware spiked, as much as about 1,000% in some months of 2021 relative to 2020. I suspect as we look into the crystal ball for what the next year portends, we're going to see a lot of the same, with certain staff continuing to work remotely, with an increase in the use of cloud-based services and cloud-based environments, many firms migrating to the cloud to make it easier to manage a remote workforce. I think we're going to continue to see these types of trends and this type of activity occurring. We've also seen a significant increase in credential stuffing, in the use of compromised passwords to try to take advantage of other cloud-based accounts. Now, one particular challenge that I think many firms struggle with is the fact that many users continue to use the same or similar passwords across multiple accounts. Now, why is this a problem? It's a problem because if hackers are able to compromise your account in one place or for one application, if you've used the same password in multiple places, the hackers are able to then use that login and use that password to compromise other web applications. And so the problem percolates down the chain. The problem is exponentially greater when you're using multiple websites and the same password. Again, a good rule of thumb here to avoid this problem: create long, strong passwords, create complex passwords, use multi-factor authentication whenever feasible, use a password vault or a password manager. This can help you create complex passwords. This can help you, create random characters and random strings of passwords. And also use unique passwords for every single website, every single application. That way, if one gets compromised, others will not also fall victim to that. Now, we saw in 2021 that leading cybersecurity vendors, such as SolarWinds, such as Kaseya, were not immune to cybersecurity threats themselves. You may be sitting there wondering, gee, if the leading cybersecurity vendors are getting hacked, what hope is there for the rest of us? And I could say, well, leading cybersecurity vendors certainly have a target on their backs. They're serving as MSPs for many, many firms out there. They're providing valuable services that many, many firms take advantage of. So there's certainly a higher profile target. The issue that it raises for the rest of us is one with respect to vendor due diligence. If we're using vendors, and particularly if we're using some of the leading providers out there, it's important that we conduct adequate and reasonable due diligence of these vendors, both initially as part of the onboarding process for that vendor and on a regular basis thereafter. That doesn't necessarily mean that every single vendor that you use, every single service provider that you use needs to be put through the same paces and with the same rigor every single year or with the same cadence. Certainly a risk-based ongoing vendor due diligence process is reasonable. It doesn't necessarily make sense to subject all of your vendors to the same level of due diligence inquiry, because obviously certain vendors, just by the nature of the value of the services they're providing to you, have access to more critical data or have more criticality to the nature of your business. And so those vendors in particular, any vendors that have access to your firm data, your client data, your investor data, those are going to be the vendors that you really want to subject to a deeper dive due diligence review. The third point I'll mention, again, recapping 2021, is that cyber workforces are very strained. The number of cybersecurity professionals out there in the workforce has not kept pace with the growing demand for this particular skill set and this particular expertise. That problem, unfortunately, is not likely to get much better in 2022. So again, looking to our crystal ball, there remains a very significant need for continuing education for our existing cybersecurity workforce, as well as training, as well as the development of individuals coming up through the ranks to fill these positions. And again, we're finding that almost every company out there has, by necessity, become a tech company in the midst of this pandemic. So what this means is that we'll continue to have a need for cybersecurity professionals and individuals with a demonstrated cybersecurity expertise. My advice there is, if you find great personnel, do what you can to keep those personnel. Keep your hiring positions open, have open positions on an ongoing basis, because the need will continue to present itself. Now, the final point I'll mention when looking at cybersecurity, recapping 2021 and looking into 2022, has to do with cyber insurance. A number of cyber insurance carriers have folded over the last year. There's been some consolidation in the industry. There has also been a revamping or restructuring of the way in which cybersecurity risk premiums are evaluated. And what we've seen is the number of carriers may have declined. The number of carriers that remain, in some cases, they're pricing their cyber insurance policies more competitively to attract that business. In other cases, their premiums have almost doubled. Again, the firms that are increasing their premiums 100%, 200% or more, are likely those that have had to pay out significant sums of money in the wake of these growing cyber attacks that we're seeing. Now, I don't want to sit here and be all gloom and doom, saying that there is no light at the end of the tunnel and there is no solution to all of these problems. The solution to cybersecurity for any firm out there is to tackle cybersecurity as you would with any aspect of your risk management function. And that is to evaluate each risk in the context of your business, in the context of your particular firm and personnel, resources, applications, business model. All that matters in terms of evaluating where cybersecurity fits within your firm's profile. And finally, it's important to remember that cybersecurity risk management in 2022 is going to not just be the problem of cybersecurity professionals. It's not just going to be siloed to an IT department. The best way that we can tackle cybersecurity risks out there is to do so collectively, to approach cybersecurity as an entire business, to approach cybersecurity with the mindset that we're all in this together, and every single individual at a firm is in a very unique position to be able to detect and stop and prevent cybersecurity risks from impacting your firm's bottom line. Thank you very much.
This has been another episode of Coffee and Regs.